Good morning to all of you tuning in this morning. I am Dr. Jason Bolton, Vice President of Community Partnerships and Admissions for the Help Group, and I will be moderating today's webcast called COVID Regression or Learning Disability. Since last August, we have offered a series of webcasts that have covered all kinds of topics: distance learning during the closure of school, how parents can help their students at home, finding perspective amid all the chaos, social skills, the mental health impact of the pandemic on our youth, making proper use of neuropsychological assessments, and many, many more. You can find each of those webcasts. We have them recorded and they are in one place, including also some virtual open houses of our schools. And you can find all of those on our website at www.thehelpgroup.org/webcasts. I know I will get a couple of questions in the chat during the presentation about whether this particular one will be recorded, and it is. This presentation will be recorded, and it will also be in that same spot on our website, so you can always go back and refer to it or let your friends know, because I think you'll find this to be a great topic today. For decades, the Help Group has provided highly individualized, high-quality intervention and special education to students with learning disabilities such as dyslexia, dyscalculia, processing disorders, attention disorders, and more through our Summit View schools. When school quickly converted in March of 2020 to a virtual model, Summit View maintained a robust and rigorous virtual curriculum, which was recognized by the National Association of Independent Schools as a model virtual education program. We understand not all students received education in a program like ours or transitioned so quickly into a system capable of maintaining rigor. Some data are suggesting that some students have experienced academic regression as a result of how school was delivered during the pandemic. For students who have learning disabilities or students who have evidenced recent regression, it is important to separate the wheat from the chaff to provide the appropriate necessary intervention. At this time, I would like to introduce our panelists today who will lead us in this important discussion: Drs. Carol Cow and Sue Sears. Dr. Carol Ann Cow has always had a passion for education and has dedicated her career to special education. She began her career as a special education teacher for students with learning disabilities, and for the past 7 years, she has been the Director of Curriculum and Support Services at the Help Group, working with 8 school programs that support students with learning disabilities, autism, and emotional disturbances. After earning her Ph.D. in Curriculum Instruction in STEM education, Dr. Cow worked with the Ministries of Education in Kuwait and the Kingdom of Bahrain on a Fulbright scholarship, helping train educators and leaders on how to work with students with special needs. She is also currently on the evaluation faculty on the special education team at Western Governors University and on the teaching faculty in the special ed department and the curriculum and instruction department of the Charter College of Education at California State University, LA. Recently, she worked with the U.S. Embassy in Sri Lanka and the National Colleges of Education in Sri Lanka to train teachers on how to work with students with disabilities, as well as to create an 8-week online course for teaching English to students with special needs. This past summer, she trained elementary, middle school, and high school teachers on best practices in working with students with special needs as a part of a teacher summer camp in the Kingdom of Bahrain through the U.S. Department of State. Wow. Dr. Sue Sears is a professor in the Department of Special Education in the Michael D. Eisner College of Education at California State University, Northridge. Dr. Sears currently serves as the co-faculty director of the UC CSU California Collaborative for Neurodiversity and Learning, a state-funded project that brings together resources from the University of California and the California State University systems to strengthen educational support for diverse students with a wide range of learning needs. including those with dyslexia. Dr. Sears' research focus on the areas of teacher education and literacy. She has received multiple special education personnel preparation grants, and most recently was co-director of a federally funded adolescent literacy model demonstration project. At CSUN, Dr. Sears coordinates services in the Teaching, Learning, and Counseling Consortium, a multidisciplinary clinic that provides low-cost educational therapy, literacy tutoring, and counseling to local and school families. I'm excited just to read those bios because it shows you the experts that we have brought together for you today. If you've been with us before, you know I like to know a little bit about all of you as well. So in a second, you're going to see a poll pop up on the screen. It's 4 quick questions. If you will just indulge us for a second so that we know exactly who's in the audience. The poll should have just popped up on your screen. And if you can just answer those 4 questions. When you finish, just a little life hack that we figured out here. When you finish, you need to X out of that poll or else it will stay up and obscure all our nice faces for the rest of the event. So people are responding. Thank you very much. We're about halfway through here. I'll give everyone a couple more seconds just to finish up. All right. And we're getting to a point where we have 90% participation. All right. So the first question I asked was, have any of you attended at least one of our previous webcasts? And this is great because while a number of you have, there's about 2/3 of you that this is the first time that you joined us. So we're very happy that you have found us and hope that you will go to our web page and find our previous talks as well, because I think you'll find them informative as well. I wanted to know who are parents, teachers, and mental health providers, and we have about 1/3 of you who are mental health providers today, and a good number of teachers and a good number of parents as well. So thank you all for joining us. I think you'll find a little bit of everything in this presentation to appeal to who you are and what you bring to us today. And then I asked her, I am concerned about someone I know who may have regressed during the pandemic, and 70% of you said that, and I guess that shows why you're here today. And then I'm concerned about someone I know who may have a learning disability, and also 70% are a yes about that as well. Obviously, the title of this suggests sort of a dichotomy, but really, you know, folks may have regressed and also have a learning disability, and that will be addressed in this presentation as well. So thank you for that. We're going to end the poll. Don't forget to hit your X to make that disappear. Okay. So we are honored that you have chosen to spend another hour with us. For those of you joining us for the first time, let me tell you a little bit about the help group. Among other social and mental health services that we offer, including our newly launched Lumina Counseling Center, which offers insurance contracted and private pay therapy and testing, the help group operates 14 non-public schools in Los Angeles County for children with autism spectrum disorders, learning disabilities, ADHD, developmental delays, emotional challenges. And we contract with more than 80 local education authorities, meaning school districts or charter schools who act as their own LEA, to provide special education related services to around 1,000 students. During this presentation, you can use the chat function to present questions that you would like the panelists to address. We will have a Q&A section at the end of the webcast, time permitting. and we will attempt to answer as many of these questions as we can. We know from doing several webcasts in the past that we will not be able to get to all of the questions. So if it's necessary, we will follow up in an email to all registrants with answers to questions that we're not able to get to. Okay, enough of me. So without further ado, please help me welcome our distinguished panelists, Doctors Carol Cow and Sue Sears.
Good morning, everyone. We are excited to have everyone join us this morning so we can go over kind of this really relevant topic that is happening in education right now. Next slide, please. So today we're just going to go over, there's going to be a brief overview of what education looked like during the first part of the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll talk a little bit about what transitioned back onto on-campus learning looked like. We're then going to kind of address the difference between learning loss or regression versus a learning disability. We've also provided just some interventions for parents, for you at home, interventions that the schools can do, and then what to do if we really do suspect our children may have a learning disability. And at the end, there are some websites and resources that we've provided for you to just gain a little more information, or to also provide you some other resources you can use at home to help your children with some of the potential learning loss. Next slide. Great. And next slide. Next slide. So we all know back in March of 2020, I think all of us were all thrown into kind of the same situation. You know, our school doors closed pretty quickly, and this happened around the world. And there was a lot of uncertainty at the time, both educators, parents. We just didn't know what it was going to be like. We initially, I think, were all told we're going to be closed for 2 weeks. And that 2 weeks lasted about a year. And so we just want to look at, well, what has happened in that time frame. Next slide. So I want everybody to keep some perspective. And I think the perspective helps because, you know, the pandemic, right, is global. It's not just us here in Los Angeles in our small kind of bubble. I mean, the pandemic affected 150 countries and 1.6 billion students. And I think when we look at it that way, you know, especially when we address a lot of the challenges some of our students were having in terms of the things they felt they lost during the pandemic, right? And as adults, our ability to cope with, let's say, stress, change, transition might have been a little better, a little easier than some of our children who might have been 5 years old at the time, or even our 16-year-olds, right? But remember, 1.6 billion students around the world went through the same type of situation that your child did. So learning shifted, and it had to shift quickly. We had to go home, and our students had to learn at home. We were thrown into using more technology than we ever had before. Some schools were better equipped than others. Some homes were better equipped than others. And then we had to kind of navigate between, well, what's the difference between synchronous and asynchronous learning, and which is better, and why are we doing one versus the other, right? Is it going to be face-to-face with my teacher this morning, or do I just log into a portal or get my assignments with an email and have mom and dad help me? And what we also saw is, you know, a lot more assistance from our parents, right? So our parents had to become key partners in learning. And we definitely saw this, especially with our younger students, our elementary students, even our middle school students, where our parents really had to step in. For our high school students, our 11th and 12th graders, they were okay with logging into Zoom, Meet, you know, Teams every morning, right? They understood the links. They knew how to log into their portals and get the links to their class, and they could do it. But for many of our second graders, third graders, sixth graders, getting them to organize all that material, find these links, log into the system was not an easy task. And so we had to rely on parent participation and parent assistant more than we ever have before. Next slide. And we did see challenges, and I think these challenges are very much global. I worked with Sri Lanka in the middle of the pandemic, and I worked with the Kingdom of Bahrain just after things started lifting and everybody was going back into campus. And so in talking to all of those different types of educators, we all saw the same things. And so I think there's a little bit of comfort knowing that we are not alone. We are not the only ones that went through this. Our children are not the only ones that missed out on birthday parties, prom. We didn't have some of these milestones that we all knew growing up, our children missed out on, but globally, we all missed out on it. And so I think there's a little comfort in knowing like, it's okay. Like we can make up the time like when we come back. Some of the challenges that as educators, we found, how do we engage our students all day long or in this particular format where there's only so much vibrance and dynamic behavior I can do as an educator in order to get my students' attention, right? How do I convert all of the wonderful, fun, hands-on activities I used to do in class and the one-on-one attention or the small group work? How do I engage my students in this format? Get them to have the same kind of quality education that they would have if we were in person. We also faced a lot of challenges in terms of equity in education, which we all saw. And that came in various ways, whether it's with resources, and equity could have come into, if you have more than one child at home, did you have 2 spaces that your children could work in quietly for school? And then did you have a space for yourself? If you had 4 children, do you have enough space? Do you have enough laptops, computers? Is your Wi-Fi enough, right? Do you even have enough of the school materials at home so your children can actually access it? Do we have internet access for all of our students? And so we started kind of seeing like there's this discrepancy in the equity, and then we had to kind of step up. And I think a lot of educational systems and corporate systems also had to step up. We all were like, we're all in it together, and we have to make it work, especially for our students trying to learn from home. We also saw some challenges with support at home. How can you help your 4th grader log into class and help them pay attention to their Zoom call with their teacher to go over a new English language arts lesson when you yourself are in a Zoom meeting for work? So we saw a lot of parents trying to juggle all of that and, doing the best that they can, but it was also hard if you didn't have multiple parents or grandparents or other people who could come and just help your child while you also did your work, because you couldn't just tell your boss or supervisor, well, I have kindergarten Zoom call from 8 to 10 this morning, so I can't attend any of my meetings. So we saw a lot of us kind of adjusting. We also saw our teachers trying to adapt all of their lessons that we would do in class into an online format, right? And so how quickly could we adjust some of our math lessons into an online format where our students can still understand and interact with the material in the same way that we would in class. And then, of course, we had the issue of COVID itself. There was still that looming aspect of, well, what happened when one of us actually got sick, whether it was your child or the parent? If you actually got sick, then education was interrupted for however long you were sick. Okay. So those are some of the challenges that we all kind of had to deal with during the pandemic. Next slide. But I also want to focus that we did learn a lot about the pandemic. And I think there was some good that came out of all of that experience, at least for educators, and especially in my role in helping our teachers kind of find all the tools that will work and can help our students kind of access the general education curriculum. We found so many new tools and games and new technology that is so engaging, that was always kind of there. But because we were thrown into a different environment where we had to kind of adapt and adapt quickly, these new tools and games kind of came to the forefront. And we are, now that this is our second year back from the pandemic, like we're still using a lot of those tools, and we're still seeing a lot of really good engagement when using these tools. We also knew that we were all adaptable. Whether you're a teacher, a student, parent, anybody, like we all adapted, right? And I think that is something that was really good that came out of the pandemic. We also figured out new ways to use technology, especially even on like teleconferencing. Our ability to connect with people, rely on distance anymore. Getting people together was a little easier because we were like, let's get on a Zoom call, and we could get, at least for our organization, everybody from different areas around Los Angeles to come on to one call instead of traveling and coordinating times. And I think our ability to connect with people, even in other states, in other countries, technology really helped with that. And we also know that, there were some successes within education. And so students can access education at home. And even when we transitioned back, there are still some schools and some districts who are still allowing students to access all of their educational needs at home. So we know that it can work. Next slide. And then we transitioned back, right? So all of that worked, we came back. And I think if we think back to, let's say, last year, the official start of a brand new school year, where the majority of schools across the country transitioned back, there was a level of excitement. We felt it on all of our campuses, where kids were very excited to come back. They had their friends. They could see their teachers. The teachers were also excited, but there was still some of that uncertainty. Like, how do we do this with masking, right? We still had to stay with our masks, which could have been a little difficult. I think for a lot of our teachers, we felt the masking kept us safe and we were okay with being safe, but we lost a lot of the nonverbal communication, right? Looking at each other's faces to see how we reacted to things, or can a student really understand what I'm saying if they can't see me smiling, right? Social distancing, it was the same. It was like, we're gonna do this, but we can't high five and we can't hug. So we're going to have to kind of connect with each other in a different way. Next slide. We also brought back a lot of the social interaction. And that's the interaction that our students were missing, right? Zoom calls are not the same level of interaction our students miss. The play dates weren't the same. So we were excited to be able to have a lot of those social interactions back, and our students were very excited to just even be in the same room with their classmates. And then we also transitioned to hybrid learning. Some schools remained online, some kind of mixed a little bit of both, where we were physically on campus, but we did some of our learning online. So there was still a lot of transitioning, and we wanted to see, okay, well, we're coming back. What has happened to education in that time frame? Okay, next slide. Next slide. And what we saw when we came back to campus, right, there was that, okay, well, what happened during the pandemic, right? And the recent data that has been published has shown us that there have been losses and gains during the pandemic. Next slide. So data recently released by LAUSD regarding students who met or exceeded standards, there had been a general overall decline within math. Right. In terms of English language arts, there was a decline in the standardized testing that they completed last year for 4th and 11th graders. But interestingly enough, the 8th grade pool increased in terms of number of students meeting or exceeding standards by 0.5%. So we also want to reiterate that not everything in the pandemic was bad. There was good that came out of it. Kids did learn. But for the sake of this particular webinar, we are going to address, well, what happens when there was learning loss? And then if it wasn't learning loss, how do we tell the difference between that and a learning disability? Next slide. And I think a lot of you in our audience today would agree. When a recent poll of K-12 teachers came out, 97% of teachers, when they stepped back onto campus last school year, reported some sort of academic loss in their students, right? 57% of those teachers who took this survey reported that they felt their students were 3 months or more behind in their social emotional learning. And I can speak from my own experience. When our students came back, we spent a lot of time re-looking at behavior, especially behavior related to what it meant to be a student. Because a lot of the things that we saw did not transition well back to class because our students were at home for a year. And so the behaviors that they picked up at home, we had to reteach. And it was simple things of, how do you enter the classroom quietly and sit in your seat? How do you get out your materials? At home, we didn't have to get our materials. At home, we woke up, rolled out of bed, and probably ate our breakfast in front of a Zoom call on the couch, with our cameras off. But when we transitioned back to school, our students, we had to help our students unlearn a lot of these behaviors. So we actually started seeing within the educational system that our 7th graders didn't look like our typical 7th graders. Even our 10th graders came in and were like, we're not quite ready for 10th grade. And so we had spent a lot of time at the beginning of the school year reteaching all of our students how to be good students, right? From very basic things of keeping our shoes on during the school day, not using the desk as our home furniture, right? Getting our materials out when we come to school, getting into our classes on time, or even things related to technology, that when we're in the middle of class and we're reading a passage or we're learning a new lesson, now is not the time to be on YouTube watching videos, right? So these are all things that we had to kind of reteach our students at the beginning of last year. And then data at the end of last year, again, it is not all bad. These teachers reported about 15 to 35% in the lower grades, basically elementary school, recovered all of their learning loss during this past school year. Okay, next slide. When we refer specifically to learning loss or regression, right, we're talking about any specific or general loss of knowledge or skills, right, related to our academics. For many of us, we can kind of simply think of it as even like when we think about summer break. Students are away from us for 10 to 12 weeks. We know during that time, there is some sort of learning loss, that the amount of information students knew in June is not exactly the same amount of information they will know in August. And there is maybe some sort of reteaching. We can also look at learning loss when students have excessive amounts of absences. When you're not in school, I can't teach you. And if I can't teach you, you can't learn the material that you're supposed to learn. And then there's the interruption of formal education, right? Which is where we're going to kind of clump the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Our educational system was interrupted. Instruction was different, and access to instruction and curriculum was different for everyone. The good thing about learning loss is it can be reversed or made up with additional instruction. So if your child is 3 months behind in English language arts or didn't learn certain math skills because the teacher never got to the material because of the pandemic, teaching the student the material now can close that gap within learning loss. Next slide. Which is different from a learning disability. And we want to make sure that we're clear between learning loss and a learning disability. So a learning disability affects our ability to understand, whether it's spoken or written language, do math, or attention, right? It interferes with our ability to read, write, do math, and then our executive functioning skills, right? So our higher order skills such as organization and attention. Next slide. So we want to definitely focus on that piece right now. And compared to learning loss or learning regression, we know learning regression is just time away from education. Maybe we didn't get that lesson. Maybe we didn't learn certain things. The cause of a learning disability is completely different. Generally, we don't know why a learning disability is caused. We know that a learning disability is brain-based, right? And it's not due to a lack of instruction or just a general lack of practice of our skills or knowledge. And a learning disability cannot just be simply reversed or overcome by extra instruction, right? It's not just, hey, an extra month of math is going to fix your challenges with dyscalculia. So we want to kind of address that. And then when we shift into kind of when we specifically talk about learning disabilities, for the sake of this webinar, we want to kind of focus on the literacy piece, because we know that reading is such a foundational skill that will affect all of our students' other topics, whether it's spelling, writing, math, social studies, all of that. So next slide. So let's spend a little bit of time on reading disabilities and dyslexia, right? What we're seeing currently is that there's an increase of students being referred to special education for reading related challenges, right? So I'm going to pass it over to Sue, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about dyslexia.
Thank you, Carol. We decided to focus on reading-related challenges, as Carol said, one, because of the increase of students being referred to special education as a result of teachers and parents seeing these difficulties. And the data suggests that approximately 80% of students who are receiving services as a student with learning disabilities are identified because of difficulties with reading and writing. A second reason to focus on reading in this particular presentation is that there is currently considerable attention, both in the public mind and in public perception, attention, and legislation, which is focused specifically on dyslexia. So next slide, please. And I think by looking at some of the common understandings and misunderstandings about dyslexia, a reading-related challenge, a reading-related learning disability, we can make it helps to inform our understanding of learning regression versus learning disability. So these are some common understandings and misunderstandings about dyslexia. Maybe just take a moment and read through them and in your own mind say, is this a myth or is this a fact? So next slide, please. So as it turns out, there are 3 facts and 3 myths in this list. Individuals with dyslexia experience difficulties in accurate and automatic recognition of words. That is indeed a fact. Dyslexia tends to run in families. That is a fact. In fact, recent research suggests that 50% of individuals with dyslexia have a close family member who also has dyslexia. And dyslexia often occurs in combination with other disabilities. It is at least 40% of students with a diagnosis of dyslexia also have another disability, 2 most common being speech and language impairment and ADHD. So those are all facts. There are also 3 myths. The first is that dyslexia is a visual processing disability that manifests itself in the reversal of similar looking letters and words. And in courses at CSUN, we often, as instructors, find that our students come in with a firm belief still that dyslexia is a visual processing deficit, when in fact it is not primarily due to visual processing difficulties, nor should it really be identified by reversals in beginning readers. However, I would say that if those reversals are persistent and pervasive beyond what we normally think, which is 7, 8 years old, they should not be dismissed. Second myth is that the majority of children grow out of dyslexia, learning to read on their own. And this is along with some other myths that kids with dyslexia are lazy or unmotivated. This is a common myth. And in fact, one of the defining features of dyslexia, and as Carol mentioned, sort of a defining feature of learning disabilities, is you do not grow out of them. They are persistent, and they persist in spite of good reading instruction. And the last myth, that all poor readers are dyslexic. Not all poor readers are dyslexic. There are many poor readers who also have difficulty with accurate and automatic recognition of words, but it's primarily the result of lack of opportunity, perhaps poor early reading instruction or other factors. And these individuals would not be considered a student with a learning disability or a student with dyslexia. So next slide, please. This is the current definition of dyslexia. It mirrors in many ways the definition of specific learning disabilities. As Carol mentioned, it's neurobiological in origin, as are learning disabilities, brain-based, intrinsic to the individual, and present lifelong challenges. As I mentioned, it's characterized primarily from an educator's standpoint as having difficulties with accurate and fluent word recognition, poor spelling, and decoding abilities. It's the notion that it is a deficit in phonological components of language is based upon a long history of research which suggests that phonological processing has a tremendous contribution to early reading, and that phonemic awareness in specific contributes to positive or lack of phonemic awareness can impact difficulties in learning to decode words. There's some recent research that suggests that is not what we call a core deficit. There are students who have phonological processing difficulties and are not dyslexic. There are students who we consider as having dyslexia who do not have phonological processing deficits. So it's a messy area in which there's considerable new work suggesting that it's a multifactorial phenomenon. And then really importantly, I think there are secondary consequences that include problems in reading comprehension, which are the results of lack of decoding skills, lack of fluency. And as many know in the community, it's the notion of the Matthew effect, that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. The more you read, the better reader you become. The less you read, the less better you become. And that's in part because you don't have exposure to the rich academic vocabulary, and you do not gain the background knowledge that you need to be a good reading comprehender. Next slide, please. Oh, let me go back. I'm sorry. If you can go back to that previous slide. I missed one of the elements there, and that is this notion of being unexpected in relation to their cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. The notion of being unexpected in relation to cognitive abilities is problematic. I'm not going to go into that now, but a much better way to frame the notion of it being unexpected is unexpected in relation to the provision of effective classroom instruction. And this has really particular relevance for students coming back from COVID. As Carol mentioned, were they never taught this? Were they not taught it well? Was it difficult to teach something well? remotely. And so this becomes a critical component of this definition and of understanding students who have a learning disability, including a specific disability like dyslexia, or is this learning regression? So now, go to the next slide, please. Thank you. I thought we'd take a look at 3 case studies, and we can look at them sort of within the context of coming back to school. All 3 of these students exhibit characteristics that might put them at risk for a learning disability, might put them at risk for a reading-related disability, and or for dyslexia. So let's look at Jonah. Jonah's a 6-year-old who is entering 1st grade. He's imaginative and enjoys drawing illustrations for stories he listens to. He's eager to learn to read, but is experiencing difficulty doing so. So now Jonah's kindergarten teacher reports that he recognizes some letters of the alphabet and a few words by sight, but struggles to produce rhyming words and count the number of sounds in words. Although exposed to letter sound instruction, Jonah is unable to consistently connect letters to the sounds they represent. Next slide, please. So we might infer that Jonah's struggles learning to read might be the result of weak phonological processing. And we might infer that because he has difficulty recognizing this distinctive units of sound in spoken language, and ability we refer to as phonemic awareness, and a skill essential for decoding. So what do we need to think about as teachers and parents and administrators and others who are interested? Are a number of things. One, we need to ensure and be certain that Jonah is receiving a strong core reading instruction. So is he getting the kind of instruction he needs in order to develop sort of the phonological processing skills he needs in order to be able to take advantage of phonics instruction? Is he getting small group work, which is targeting those skills? Critically important is frequent progress monitoring. Is he making gains? And I think Carol also referring to, if a child is making gains with proper instruction, then we can begin to say, okay, he's on a good path to being successful. And with progress and consistent progress, one could say, this may be the result of a learning regression, not of a learning disability. But he also has some what we might call pink flags that need to pay attention to and might be referred for screening in order to really target more specifically those areas that we might want to work on. Okay, next slide. So
Dr. Sears, I just want to give a time check. So we're about 13 minutes to 11 o'clock.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
I know. Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah. So I will let you read about Ruby. She is in special education. She has good listening comprehension, but is having difficulty with reading comprehension. And next slide, please. This is probably due to some issues that she has with fluency. And so, fluency is so critically important because it gives you time. It gives you time to attend to, remember, and think about what you're reading. So what do we think about Ruby? Well, I think we need to leverage her strong language skills, both in terms of fluency and in terms of reading comprehension. We need to give her some instruction in multi-syllable words. We need to encourage her to listen to grade level texts and praise her for her understanding of them. And again, frequent progress monitoring to determine if she needs more intensive intervention. And then let's look at our last student, Alejandro, who's in a 12-year-old in 7th grade. Alejandro has been participating in an intensive reading program, and yet he is still having difficulty accessing middle school reading material. Again, we want to ensure that his reading intervention program is evidence-based and explicit and systematic. But here's an individual that we might say has a strong pink flag and almost a red flag, as we know that he also has a close family member who has difficulty reading. And Alejandro might be one. You do all the same things, make sure he's getting the best instruction, engage in progress monitoring, but he might be a student after COVID, and whether or not we had COVID, that we might want to refer for a diagnostic evaluation. So next slide, please. Okay, next slide. This is just a table of potential indicators of dyslexia and reading-related struggles. I want to emphasize 2 points. Not one of these would indicate that a student has dyslexia. As Carol said, learning disabilities need a diagnostic assessment, and that's definitely what we look for here. Second point is that it exists across the lifespan, and that the difficulties change over time as the demands of schooling change over time. Next slide. The experience of learning disabilities of all kinds is unique. No one person with a learning disability is like no other person with a learning disability, but all students have strengths and interests that can be leveraged to counterbalance their challenges, and having strong family advocates is absolutely critical in this endeavor. Next slide. And I think I'll turn it over here to Carol.
Thank you, Sue. We just want to go over just a handful of interventions that can be done to continue to support our students. Next slide. So some activities for parents, educators, for you to do at home. And like Sue said earlier, the less access to things and material our students have, the less ability for them to gain. So one of the most important things we can do with our children is to read with them, right? Whether it's because they like hearing stories, whether we're trying to deal with some learning loss, whether it's a learning disability, or even for our English language learners, right? There won't be an acquisition of more language unless they have access to language. So read with your child, right? We also find that our most successful students have a structure at home that is a little similar to school, in the sense that they have a space that they go to complete homework, to do assignments, or a quiet space, right? Because they need that type of structure to know that when I'm in this space or I'm at this desk, I can focus on my material. So provide a space for your students to learn. We also recommend using both online and offline activities. There's so much technology going on right now, and technology can be good, but it can also be overused. So there are also a lot of offline activities, like whether it's board games, math board games, reading board games, that can be used, that are just as good as kind of online games. We also want parents to help us foster a growth mindset in our students. One, show interest in our students, that whatever they're interested in, you're also interested in, and then you can use some of those interests, maybe with the reading material that you choose, right? And then if you really are curious, it's always good to reach out to your teachers to see and ask specifically, do you feel my child is missing certain skills that they should have gained? Or how do you feel my child is progressing in your class? Okay, next slide. There are some school-based interventions, and I do want to just note that these are the things that we do at Summit View. So I can't speak to every educational institution out there, but specifically at Summit View, our population is for students with learning disabilities. So we do have a keen understanding of the types of learners that we have and their needs. So based on that, and to support them in terms of whether it's learning loss due to the pandemic, whether it's their learning disability or the combo of the two, we build in daily reading instruction for all of our students, whether you start with us in, let's say, 2nd or 3rd grade, or you're in 12th grade. Reading instruction is built into the curriculum. Those reading skills are then practiced throughout the school day in the content area classes. So if you're learning decoding skills in reading class, you might see those same decoding skills brought up in your math class or your social studies class, right? And we target the skills our students need. So if our students are really struggling with phonemic awareness, they'll be placed in reading groups that focus on that. If it's vocabulary building, we'll focus on that. We do focus on fostering a growth mindset. We spend a lot of time getting to know our students so that we can use their interest and give them choice in their education. And we work really hard to create partnerships with families because we know that's very important in order to maintain, growth at home and growth at school. Next slide. And then in the event that you potentially suspect your child has a learning disability, please remember that a learning disability can only be diagnosed by a trained professional through formal evaluation. So our suggestion is to contact the school regarding the diagnosis process for a learning disability. And then in our last little bit here, I'm going to turn it over to Sue, who is just going to briefly go over some of the resources and websites that we'll provide for you in this presentation for you to get more information.
Next slide, please. So the International Dyslexia Association has a number of resources. You can go to the website. They have a very good handbook for parents, as does the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity, also has wonderful resources for parents. Next slide, please. The Haskins Global Literacy Hub is a wealth of information, and it's organized developmentally, and I would encourage teachers and parents to go free access. Reading Rockets also has a lot of resources, one for family questions about reading. You can look up, there are many, if you're looking for specific things to do, and this is particularly, I'm gearing this more towards parents, is there are reading fluency activities online. This just happens to be one that seemed good to me. All sorts of other areas too, helping with phonics, helping with phonemic awareness. And then this is a freely accessible app for adolescents who are struggling with decoding. It was developed by my colleagues at Cal State Northridge, and you can get it online. And it's a highly engaging, motivating app to support older readers who are struggling with decoding. And I think, is there another slide, or I think that may be it? Oh, there is. So these are some readings for people who like to go back to the paper medium, and then 11 ways parents can help their children read. So with that, I want to say thank you for inviting Carol, I'll speak for you, and me to be a part of this presentation. And I think, Jason, maybe you have some questions. I don't know if we have time for or not.
Thank you, Dr. Sears and Dr. Cow. I think this has been a very important discussion, and in a lot of ways, we're just sort of touching the surface, I think. There have been a number of questions, but with time, let's get to one of them, and then we can see if we can reach out to folks with other questions that we might want to get to. But one of them that I found interesting, that I think brings together a lot of the talk that we've heard, is what kind of assessment do you recommend to rule out COVID versus learning disabilities or processing issues? So people are really asking about that distinction, and what kind of like formal procedures would someone look at to make sure it's one or the other or both?
Do you want me to start that, Carol? And I'll start, and then I'll turn it over to you, because I have thoughts on that. So you mentioned formal procedures, and I would say it's difficult to find any formal procedure. You're not going to find a test that says, is it learning regression, is it learning loss, or is it a learning disability? Rather, I think it has a lot to do with teacher judgment. It means you have to really observe and do progress monitoring. And if you see progress and you see reasonable rates of progress, then you can make a decision that this is probably learning regression, not a learning disability. If those gaps continue over time, then I think that is more an area where you might want to dig a little bit deeper and maybe refer for an assessment. And then I'll turn over to Carol because I know you have experience with this.
I agree with Sue. I think there are some, if we're looking at potential learning loss, we could see some gaps if we did some, let's say, curriculum-based measures, some diagnostic tests. If a diagnostic test shows that our student has all the skills of a fourth grader in math and is ready to move on to fifth grade, but missed every question related to, let's say, fractions, just fractions alone, we can then look at, well, were fractions taught the year before? Did we get to fractions? And then we can see if I give some instruction related to fractions to deal with this gap, if the student improves, then we're really kind of maybe looking a little more about learning loss or just not having access to that instruction at the time. But if we teach fractions this year and next year and even the year after, and a student cannot understand it with the best type of instruction, then that's something that might give us what Sue considers like a pink flag. Like, again, a learning disability is something that continues time and time again that has nothing to do with even receiving the best type of instruction. But if you are worried about a learning disability or curious, then it is a more formalized process to be diagnosed.
Okay, I think we've come to our end of our time. Again, thank you so much, Carol and Sue, for joining us and sharing your expertise with us this morning. This presentation has been recorded, and we will let you know when it's available to view and share with your colleagues and friends. We will also get the PowerPoint out to all registrants. I know we've had a couple of questions about that. If there were questions that we didn't get today, we'll also share some answers with you as well. Please save the date for our next webcast, which will be on December 7th at 10 p.m. No, not p.m. We will do it in the morning again. It will be at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, in which we will discuss supporting the mental well-being of young people during the holidays. More information will be shared with you as the date quickly approaches. At the Help Group, we always endeavor to provide the best education to our students and to impart what we have learned about best practices to parents, other schools, and our community. If you would like to learn more about our schools and programs, you may go to our website at www.thehelpgroup.org/aboutus. You may also email our admissions department at admissions@thehelpgroup.org. You can even call us on the telephone at 877-943-5747. You may learn about our Summit View schools specifically by going to their website at www.summitview.org. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your choosing to spend your valuable time with us today. We at the Help Group are here for you when you need us. Have a great rest of your day.